All right, for this Meet the Artist video, I'd like to introduce the artwork of a photographer named Fan Ho, and I'll spell his name. It's F-A-N is his first name, and H-O is his last name. Uh, so Mr. Ho was a Chinese photographer, and he was born in Shanghai, a city in China, in 1931. But what I'm about to show you are photographs that were taken mostly in the city Hong Kong. So just keep that in mind. He's actually still living. Currently, he's, I believe, 84 or 85. And when he took these photographs, he would have been very young. Let me do the math real quick. He would 20, yeah, very early 20s, so not that much older than you. And this is a photograph here of Han, and he's some of his works are in the background there. So the next photo that I just wanted to show you is actually the camera. It's not the exact camera, but it's a very similar camera to the one that Mr. Fan would have used, and this is called a medium format camera, and you had to look through the top of it in order to see the image. So the film actually was bigger than normal 35 millimeter film, but it looks very like antique now. You might see it at a thrift store or something, but it's anyway, I just wanted to show you the camera that he used. Now, this first image that we're going to take a look at, this is, to me, a wonderful image. It looks like an alleyway between, or maybe just an area between two streets that is accessible with through boat. Now, in Venice, in Italy, there's tons of little alleyways like this, and they ride around on what are called gondolas, and it's a pretty interesting thing. If you've ever been to Venice, or if you ever plan on going, you could look pictures of it up. It's pretty fascinating. But instead of having streets, they oftentimes have little waterways, and instead of cars, they take little boats called gondolas. But this is an interesting photograph here in Hong Kong, and it looks like could be in Venice. And now this next photograph that Fan took is probably maybe my favorite. Now just look at the composition here. The shadow divides the large rectangle perfectly, and you have a woman who's just standing in the light, just contemplating. She looks calm. This image, just think about how it makes you feel. I wonder what she's thinking. It's a very compelling image, and I think that black and white aspect to his work really helps to kind of highlight that level of I don't know what I want to call it, but there's just a certain aesthetic that black and white certainly works for, and Fan's photography is certainly an example of that. Now, he's mostly, in this next picture, it shows that he's a street photographer, kind of like I showed you the work of Lee Friedlander and Henri Cartier-Bresson. So, like those photographers, and actually similar to the decade of, a little bit earlier than Friedlander and a little bit later than Bresson. But he was a street photographer, Fan was. And this is another one of his works. He shot mostly in black and white, just like Friedlander and Bresson. There's a stereotype where there's like a bias toward black and white in photography, and for a long time, photography was thought, fine art photography. I'm talking like art photography that would be hanging on the museum walls, was for a long time thought to be only black and white photography could be at that level of fine art photography. And that actually, that idea was sort of changed, I believe, in the 70s. So anytime you see photography before the 70s that's considered like really fine photography, it's probably almost always going to be in black and white, and that's just a bias that photographers had at that time. But just take a look at this. This is like taking getting in a time machine and going back to 1950s Hong Kong. Look at these signs. it's very foreign. Even today, for people living in Hong Kong, this would be this could have been a foreign place to them. The next image shows just a brief moment of a interaction between a couple people walking up a staircase and one person walking down. What I like about this is actually a photograph that to me is like a perfect example of backlighting. Look at remember back when I showed you that, when I did that lesson on lighting and directionality of lighting, and I went into my garage with the flashlight and showed you like if you hold a flashlight behind the basketball, you get a certain kind of light around the edges. But look at the people here. Like, look at any of the people, the 5 people in the middle, and you see this like white border around them. And that's because the light sort of comes, not sort of, but the light comes from behind them. And then there's like this shadowy aspect to the people. And that certainly has a feel to it. It's one of these like intangible, very hard to explain things, but it's sort of, it kind of has a magical glow for sure. In the next photograph, we have a person walking down a sidewalk carrying who knows what. But this is just, another moment in the life of a citizen of Hong Kong in the 50s or perhaps the 60s. The next image shows, I think this is a really compelling image here, 2 different kinds of ships here. So the one on the left being a aircraft carrier. I can actually see the plane, one of the planes there. I see men standing on the carrier in the distance. If you look carefully, or full screen mode maybe, you can see people standing on the platform of the aircraft carrier, and then behind them is the airplane. And now you see on the right a very old and perhaps a very traditional boat. That the juxtaposition here is really interesting. Think about the hues, or the values. The values of gray in this image. The mountains are just so light, barely light. In fact, they fade into white because of the fog, and that has a certain mysterious quality to it for sure. And then you have the aircraft carrier, which is also very light. But then right in front of it, there's a very small boat that's like the blackest, darkest thing in the picture. And then off to the right, the traditional looking boat, same thing. It's really dark. Well, that's selectively edited by Fan. This was done in the darkroom, and he went in and wanted to make that area of his photographs darker. So think of what kind of effect that has. And the last image we're going to take a look at here, it looks like perhaps it's an artisan. It looks like he's creating these pots. Who knows? I'm not too sure about the process of how this works, but it looks like he's creating, maybe he's adding some kind of enamel or glaze onto some iron pots. It looks like woks that you could cook a stir fry in or something. So this is just, again, the daily life, just one snapshot, one moment in the history of one person in Hong Kong. And this person may be dead by now, or they may be elderly. Who knows? Maybe the person doesn't even know that this photograph was taken. I just want to end this Meet the Artist session by saying that this photographer was, obviously in his day when he was in his early 20s, he was just going out into the streets and taking these photographs for fun. It wasn't like he was a professional photographer at that time. And in fact, it wasn't until much later that these images became really celebrated in in the community of fine art and photography. So just because, I guess what I mean to say is just because you're young and just because you're inexperienced doesn't mean that you don't have a vision and that you don't have the ability to create photographs that stand the test of time. So you could be just like Fan here. go out into the world and find these moments and document them. And then maybe in 100 years, we'll be talking about your photographs. So.